She moved quietly through the carrier's bridge, making notes in a small book. No one questioned her presence until Admiral Thorne noticed. His reaction was immediate. "Who authorized a civilian on my bridge?" Without waiting for an answer, he ordered her removed. No one defended her as security escorted her away, whispers following her exit. 90 minutes later, as Operation Stillwater began, the launch system crashed. Authentication codes failed. Foreign observers exchanged worried glances. With the Admiral's authority crumbling, the bridge doors opened. She returned. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about hidden strength and unrecognized heroes, please consider subscribing to our channel for more. The USS Aegis sliced through Pacific waters. Its massive frame housing over 5,000 sailors and officers, all preparing for Operation Stillwater, a classified missile defense drill years in the planning. On the bridge, Admiral Zephyr Thorne surveyed his domain with the confidence of a man who had earned every medal on his chest. The morning sunlight streamed through the reinforced windows, glinting off polished surfaces and illuminating the focused expressions of his crew. Merritt Aldridge stood quietly by the navigation console, her silver streaked hair pulled into a functional bun, her navy pants suit neither expensive nor cheap, designed precisely to draw no attention. She studied the display with practiced eyes, occasionally making notes in a small black notebook. Though she moved with purpose, she seemed to exist just outside everyone's field of vision, a talent she had perfected over decades. Lieutenant Commander Farrow passed by, barely glancing at her as he delivered reports to the Admiral. 3 analysts huddled nearby, discussing trajectory calculations, their eyes sliding past Merritt, as if she were part of the equipment. She preferred it this way. Invisibility was a form of armor she had cultivated with care. When Admiral Thorne finally noticed her, his reaction was immediate, cutting through the ambient chatter of the bridge like a blade. "Who authorized a civilian on my bridge during pre-drill procedures?" His voice carried across the bridge, silencing conversations. All eyes turned to the woman, who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. No one answered. No one claimed responsibility for her presence. Merritt felt the weight of scrutiny settle on her shoulders, but didn't flinch. She'd experienced far worse than momentary discomfort. Lieutenant Commander Farrow approached the Admiral, lowering his voice slightly. "Sir, security protocols indicate all civilian observers should be in the designated viewing area." Merritt said nothing, simply closing her notebook. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, took in every reaction on the bridge. She noted who seemed confused, who appeared suspicious, and most importantly, who showed recognition. There weren't many in the latter category, just as it should be. "Security, escort this woman to the visitor quarters," Admiral Thorne ordered. "She has no business here." Farrow stepped forward, professional but firm. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with me." From nearby, Enantala smirked. "Someone's tour group took a wrong turn," he murmured, just loud enough for nearby officers to hear. Several junior officers suppressed smiles. As Merritt was escorted toward the exit, she remained composed, her face betraying nothing. Behind her, the whispers began rippling through the bridge personnel like a current through shallow water. Probably some bureaucrat's Assistant Defense Department pencil pusher. How'd she even get clearance to board? Commander Lawrence Afer, the ship's executive officer, watched her departure with an unreadable expression. Unlike the others, he said nothing, his eyes following her until the bridge door slid closed. He then returned to his duties, checking his watch with particular attention. Merritt allowed herself to be led through the carrier's maze-like corridors. The security officer kept a respectful distance, but made it clear she wasn't to deviate from their path. They passed through 3 security checkpoints, each requiring the officer to explain his unusual escort duty. Civilian found on bridge. Admiral's orders to escort to visitor quarters. At the 3rd checkpoint, an older chief petty officer, with weathered features, looked up from his station. His eyes met Merritt's for a brief moment, his expression giving away nothing. "Understood. Proceed." Merritt was finally deposited in a small but comfortable room designated for visiting officials. The security officer hesitated at the door. "Ma'am, you're requested to remain here until further notice. If you need anything, use the internal comm system." He seemed unsure how to address her, unable to determine her status or importance. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Merritt replied, her voice carrying a quiet authority that made him stand slightly straighter. "That will be all." Once alone, Merritt checked her watch. The drill would begin in approximately 90 minutes. She sat at the small desk and reopened her notebook, reviewing her observations from the bridge. Everything was proceeding according to plan, including her dismissal. She had expected nothing less from Admiral Thorne, whose reputation for strict adherence to protocol was well documented. She turned to a fresh page and began writing a sequence of numbers and letters, her handwriting precise and measured. When she finished, she tore the page from the notebook, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her inner pocket. Then she waited. Precisely 87 minutes later, a soft knock came at her door. The weathered chief petty officer stood outside, his posture suggesting casual business. "Director, it's time," he said simply when she opened the door. Merritt nodded and followed him into the corridor. They moved unhurriedly, but with purpose, bypassing the main thoroughfares in favor of service passageways. Few personnel passed them, and those who did merely nodded at the chief, without questioning his companion. "Status," Merritt asked as they approached the bridge. "Phase 1 complete. System lockdown initiating in approximately 3 minutes." "Good," she replied. "And our observer in position on the bridge." The atmosphere had transformed in Merritt's absence. Representatives from 4 allied nations stood in the observation area, their uniforms crisp and formal. General Blackburn from the Joint Chiefs had arrived, his presence underscoring the importance of the exercise. Digital displays showed the positions of 16 vessels participating in the coordinated exercise, spread across thousands of square miles of ocean. "Operation Stillwater commencing in 3 minutes," announced Lieutenant Khatri from Communications, her voice clear and professional. "All stations report ready status." Admiral Thorne stood at the command position, back straight, voice clear, all traces of the earlier disruption gone from his demeanor. "Begin authentication sequence." Lieutenant Khatri's fingers flew across her console. "Authentication protocols initiated." "Sir." She paused, frowning slightly. "Sir, authentication protocols are cycling but not accepting command." "Codes." The first hint of tension appeared in the room. Commander Nakamura joined her at the station, his movements quick but controlled as he assessed the situation. Redundancy systems also failing to respond. "Admiral," he reported after a moment, confusion evident in his voice. Admiral Thorne's confidence didn't waver. "Override with emergency protocol Scarlet 7. The computer's response was immediate, the female voice emanating clearly through the bridge speakers. "Access denied." The first flicker of concern crossed Thorne's face. "Try again." Khatri repeated the procedure, her movements more deliberate this time. "Access denied." General Blackburn stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp. "Admiral, if your vessel cannot execute basic launch protocols during a simulation, I have serious concerns about operational readiness." The foreign observers exchanged glances. The Korean attaché whispered something to his colleague, who nodded gravely. The impression they were receiving was exactly what Merritt had anticipated. American military technology failing at a crucial moment. Thorne's face wrinkled slightly. "Try my personal override authorization." Khatri input the Admiral's code, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The system processed for 3 seconds, the display showing a rotating authentication symbol. "Access denied." System lockdown initiated. The old chief petty officer, who had slipped onto the bridge during the growing confusion, quietly made his exit, unnoticed by most in the mounting tension. Commander Okafor, however, tracked his departure with his eyes before reaching into his pocket to withdraw a sealed envelope. He studied it with a troubled expression, checking the timestamp printed on its surface. On the navigation display, an unusual symbol briefly flashed before disappearing, a circular emblem with a stylized eye at its center. Only someone watching for it would have noticed. "This is beyond embarrassing, Admiral," General Blackburn said quietly. "It's a strategic failure." Admiral Thorne's composure finally broke. "I want every system analyst on this carrier in here now. Someone get strategic command on the line." The computer responded before anyone could move. "Communications restricted. Sovereignty verification required." The bridge fell silent as the implication sank in. They were cut off, isolated, and in front of international observers, they had lost control of their own systems. "What the hell is happening?" Admiral Thorne demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sir," Commander Nakamura reported, "all automated defense systems are in standby mode. Manual overrides are not responding." The Korean attach leaned toward his American counterpart. "Perhaps this demonstration was premature," he suggested, his tone carefully diplomatic, but the criticism clear. Admiral Thorne turned to his communications officer. "Use the emergency channel direct line to Pacific Command." "Sir, all external communications are locked down," Lieutenant Khatri responded, frustration evident in her voice. "The system is requiring a sovereignty verification we don't have." "Override it," Thorne ordered. "I cannot, sir. The system is not recognizing any of our authorization codes." General Blackburn stepped closer to Thorne, lowering his voice. "Admiral, if this is a system failure, it needs to be resolved immediately. If it's something else," he left the implication hanging. "It's not a security breach," Thorne insisted. "This system was vetted by the NSA last month." As the tension mounted, Commander Afer finally opened the sealed envelope he had been holding, scanning its contents quickly. His expression shifted from concern to understanding. He checked his watch one final time and moved toward the Admiral. "Sir," he said quietly, "I believe help is already on the way." As if on cue, the bridge doors slid open. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. All eyes turned to see who had arrived. Merritt Aldridge walked calmly onto the bridge, the old chief petty officer now at her side. Her posture had changed subtly, a shift from unobtrusive to commanding, though nothing in her appearance had altered. It was as if she had simply allowed a hidden aspect of herself to become visible. Admiral Thorne's face darkened. "I ordered you confined to visitor quarters. Security, remove this woman immediately." Without acknowledging the Admiral, Merritt walked directly toward the command console. Her movements were unhurried but purposeful, as if she had performed this exact sequence countless times before. Two security officers moved to intercept her, hands moving instinctively toward their sidearms. Commander Okafor raised his hand. "Let her pass," he said quietly, his voice carrying unexpected authority. The security officers hesitated, looking between Okafor and Admiral Thorne for clarification. In that moment of uncertainty, Merritt continued forward. General Blackburn, watching from nearby, narrowed his eyes. His expression shifted from confusion to something else, recognition dawning slowly across his features. He took a half step forward, then deliberately stepped back, choosing to observe rather than intervene. "What is the meaning of this?" Admiral Thorne demanded, but the question lacked his earlier conviction. Something in Merritt's demeanor had changed the dynamic on the bridge. Merritt reached the lock-on console. With practice efficiency, she entered a 16-digit code for memory, her fingers moving across the keypad in a precise rhythm. The system processed for a moment, lights blinking in rapid sequence across the display. "Sovereign override accepted," announced the computer, its synthetic voice somehow carrying a note of difference that had been absent before. "Shadow protocol authenticated. Welcome, Director Aldridge." The main screen displayed a classification that made several officers inhale sharply. Shadow 7, authority active. Below, it appeared a security clearance level that most in the room had never seen before, designated by a simple black hexagon with a single white marking at its center. Admiral Thorne's face drained of color as understanding struck him. His eyes darted from Merritt to General Blackburn, who now wore a grim expression. The Admiral opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. reassessing everything he thought he knew about command structure. Commander Afer approached Merritt, producing the small black notebook she had been carrying earlier. He handed it to her with a respectful nod. "The preliminary analysis, Director, as you requested." The foreign observers straightened, their body language transforming from skeptical to alert respect. The Korean attach, who had been critical moments before, now watched with undisguised interest, his previous dismissiveness replaced by careful attention. Ensign Tala, who had mocked her earlier, stared open-mouthed. His complexion had palled considerably as the implications of his earlier behavior sank in. General Blackburn moved to Admiral Thorne's side. "You've never met a shadow director before," he asked quietly. "They're embedded in all strategic installations. Ultimate override. Authority, answerable only to POTUS and the Joint Chiefs." Admiral Thorne's voice was barely audible. "Why wasn't I informed?" "That's the point," Admiral General Blackburn replied. "If you knew, so might others." Merritt's fingers moved across the console with practiced precision. Status indicators changed from red to green across the board. Systems came back online one by one, each activating with a soft chime of confirmation. The bridge crew watched in stunned silence as she navigated security protocols that had stymied their best efforts. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. The room fell completely silent to hear her words. "The drill was compromised," she said. "Someone attempted to use it to access our defensive grid architecture." Her fingers tapped several more commands, bringing up a diagnostic screen that only she and Commander Afer seemed able to interpret. "The breach has been isolated. You may proceed with the drill, Admiral." For several seconds, Admiral Thorne seemed unable to respond. The power dynamic on his bridge had shifted so dramatically that he appeared to be recalibrating his entire understanding of his command. Finally, he straightened his uniform, composing himself with visible effort. "Director Aldridge, I apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." Merritt turned to face him fully. For the first time, she allowed the full weight of her experience and authority to show in her expression. "There was no misunderstanding, Admiral. Your security protocols functioned as they should. My role requires invisibility." The bridge crew watched this exchange in stunned silence. The woman they had dismissed, even mocked, now commanded a level of authority that superseded everyone present, including Admiral Thorne. The revelation created an almost physical pressure in the room, a collective realization that they had been working alongside someone whose true purpose and power had been deliberately concealed from them. General Blackburn cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should discuss the security implications in private, Director." Merritt nodded. "A full briefing will be provided to those with appropriate clearance. For now, the exercise should continue." She turned to Lieutenant Khatri. "Communications are restored. Inform the fleet that we'll resume in 5 minutes." "Yes," Director Khatri responded, the title coming naturally despite never having used it before. Merritt turned back to the central console, making a few final adjustments. As she worked, Admiral Thorne moved to her side, his voice lowered for privacy. "How long have you been embedded in my command?" he asked. "That's not relevant to the current situation, Admiral," she replied without looking up. "What matters is identifying how the intrusion attempt originated." Admiral Thorne processed this deflection, understanding it as the gentle rebuke it was. "Of course. How can my team assist by continuing the exercise as planned? Deviations from protocol will only alert the responsible parties." She finished her work and straightened up. "Commander Okafor has been briefed on additional security measures." As Merritt turned to leave, having completed her task without fanfare, Commander Okafor called out, "Attention on deck." The entire bridge crew, including Admiral Thorne, after a moment's hesitation, stood at attention. The foreign military attaches, recognizing what was happening, also rose in respect. It was a gesture typically reserved for the highest-ranking officers or civilian leadership, a spontaneous acknowledgement of authority that transcended formal rank. Merritt paused, visibly uncomfortable with the display. She acknowledged the gesture with a slight nod, but said nothing more. As she exited, The chief petty officer fell in step behind her, his posture revealing that he had been her security detail all along. The bridge doors closed behind them, leaving a transformed atmosphere in their wake. After she left, the bridge remained silent for several seconds, each person processing what they had witnessed. It was General Blackburn who finally broke the silence. "I've encountered shadow program personnel twice in my 30-year career," he said. "Both times under circumstances I'm still not permitted to discuss. Consider yourselves privileged to have seen one in action." Admiral Thorne nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Resume drill preparations," he finally said, his voice different now, more measured. "And schedule a full security briefing for senior staff at 18,800 hours." As the bridge returned to its normal operations, the experience lingered like a vivid afterimage. The revelation of Merritt Aldridge's true identity had shattered assumptions and reframed their understanding of authority. For many present, it was a humbling reminder that true power often resided where they least expected it. Commander Afer returned to his station, fielding curious glances from his colleagues with professional detachment. He had known, or at least suspected, something the others hadn't. That knowledge had placed him in a unique position during the crisis, and now raised questions about his own role in the command structure. Lieutenant Khatri re-established communications with the fleet, her movements more focused than before. "All vessels reporting ready status. Operation Stillwater can resume on your command, Admiral." Admiral Thorne took his position at the center of the bridge. "Proceed with the exercise." His voice carried its usual authority, but those who knew him well could detect a subtle difference. The encounter had changed something fundamental in his understanding of his command. As the drill progressed, the events of the past hour receded into the background of immediate operational concerns. But in quiet moments, each officer found their thoughts returning to the woman who had walked onto their bridge, transformed from invisible to commanding in a matter of moments. In the officers' mess later that afternoon, whispered conversations attempted to piece together the mystery. Who was she really? How long had she been aboard? What was the shadow program? The speculation filled gaps in knowledge with imagination, creating a mythology around Merritt Aldridge that would only grow with time. Enan Talivera sat silently during these discussions, his earlier mockery weighing heavily on him. He had dismissed someone with authority that dwarfed anything he had encountered in his young career. The lesson was one he wouldn't soon forget. As evening approached, Admiral Thorne reviewed the day's exercise results in his private quarters. The data showed a successful completion of all objectives with performance metrics exceeding expectations across multiple categories. By any standard measure, Operation Stillwater had been a success. Yet he found himself distracted, his thoughts returning repeatedly to the moment Merritt Aldridge had entered her override code, the way the system had responded to her, the immediate recognition of her authority, the classification level he had never seen before. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. Commander Okafor stepped inside, carrying a sealed folder marked with security classifications. "The briefing materials for this evening, sir." Admiral Thorne accepted the folder. "You knew about her." It wasn't a question, but Okafor answered anyway. "Not exactly, sir. I was informed that there was a shadow program asset aboard approximately 14 months ago. I was given protocols to follow in the event of certain contingencies. Today was the first time those protocols were activated. And you never thought to inform me? My orders were explicit, Admiral. Knowledge containment was paramount." Admiral Thorne nodded slowly. "I understand. Thank you, Commander." After Okafor left, Thorne opened the folder and began to read. The documents contained information on the security breach that had been attempted during the exercise, technical details about how the intrusion had been detected and blocked, and recommendations for preventing similar vulnerabilities in the future. What the folder did not contain was any information about Merritt Aldridge or the Shadow Program. That Admiral Thorne realized was a mystery that would remain largely unsolved, at least for him. It was both frustrating and strangely reassuring, knowing there were safeguards in place that even he wasn't aware of. As he closed the folder, he made a mental note to pay more attention to the unassuming people in his command. The ones who moved quietly through the carrier's daily life. The ones who watched and listened more than they spoke. The invisible ones who might, like Merritt Aldridge, be far more than they appeared. The day's drills had concluded successfully. Aircraft were returning to the carrier, their landings silhouetted against the orange-red Pacific sunset. The flight deck pulsed with organized chaos as crews guided jets to their designated spots. The orchestrated dance of naval aviation playing out with practiced precision. Merritt Aldridge stood alone at the edge of the flight deck in a designated safe observation area, the wind tugging at her simple bun, loosening strands of silver streaked hair. She had exchanged her pantsuit for standard-issue naval windbreaker over civilian clothes, a concession to the harsh conditions on deck. Her presence had been acknowledged with curious glances from the deck crew, but no one approached her. Word had spread quickly throughout the ship about the morning's events. She watched the aircraft operations with professional interest, occasionally making notes in the small black notebook that seemed perpetually in her possession. Though her focus appeared to be on the technical aspects of the landings, she was acutely aware of the figure approaching from behind. Admiral Thorne stepped up beside her, his uniform crisp despite the long day. For a long moment, both watched the aircraft operations in silence, the roar of jet engines making conversation difficult. When a brief lull came, he turned slightly toward her. "How long have you been on my ship?" he finally asked. 3 years, Admiral." Thorne turned to study her profile, unable to mask his surprise. 3 years, he repeated, the weight of this revelation hanging between them. "I've seen you before in the officers' mess, the library." "Yes, I thought you were part of the administrative staff." A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. That was the intention. Admiral Thorne looked back toward the horizon where the sun was sinking rapidly into the sea. "All this time," he said, his voice thoughtful rather than accusatory, "you've been evaluating my command." "No," Merritt corrected gently. "I've been protecting it from what?" She considered her response carefully. The USS Aegis represents one of the most sophisticated weapon systems ever deployed. There are entities, both foreign and domestic, who would exploit any vulnerability they could find. And today, a test, she said simply, one designed to determine whether certain safeguards were functioning correctly. Admiral Thorne processed this. Was it successful? Largely, the primary systems responded as expected. There are some concerns about the communications encryption that will need to be addressed. A fighter jet screamed overhead momentarily, drowning out all possibility of conversation. They watched it catch the third wire on the deck, a textbook landing that drew approving nods from both observers. When they could speak again, Thorne asked the question that had been troubling him since the morning. "Why wasn't I informed of your presence, of your authority?" "Someone needs to be the last line of defense," Merritt said simply. "Someone without a uniform, without rank or recognition. Someone whose authority remains invisible until the moment it's needed most." "The shadow program," Thorne said. "I've heard rumors, never confirmed." "Best that it stay that way, Admiral." He studied her for a moment, seeing her truly for the first time. Not just the unassuming appearance she cultivated, but the steel beneath it. The quiet competence that had allowed her to blend seamlessly into his command for years while maintaining vigilance he hadn't even been aware of. "Thank you for your service, Director." She gave a small, genuine smile, the first full one he'd seen. "Just doing my job, like everyone else on this ship." As they turned to walk back inside, the deck crew paused in their work, standing at attention as she passed. No words were exchanged, but the respect was palpable. News traveled quickly on an aircraft carrier, and by now most of the crew had heard some version of what had transpired on the bridge. The story had undoubtedly grown in the telling, but the essential truth remained. The unremarkable woman walking past them carried authority few of them would ever comprehend. Merritt acknowledged their respect with simple nods, maintaining the same unassuming demeanor she had cultivated for years. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction at finally being recognized. If anything, she seemed slightly uncomfortable with the attention, preferring the shadows to the spotlight. As they reached the entrance to the island superstructure, Admiral Thorne paused. "Will you be staying aboard after we return to port?" "My assignment here is complete," Merritt replied. "A replacement will be designated. Will I be informed who it is?" She smiled slightly. "What do you think, Admiral?" Thorne nodded, understanding. "Of course not." He hesitated. "Is there anything I should know before you depart?" "Your command is solid," she said. "Your crew is well trained, your security protocols are effective, and your leadership is respected. Those are the things that matter. And the security breach attempt is being tracked. You'll be briefed on any actionable intelligence." They entered the carrier's interior. The relative quiet a stark contrast to the noise of the flight deck. As they walked through the corridors, personnel snapped to attention, their eyes following Merritt with newfound awareness. She acknowledged them briefly, but didn't slow her pace. "The Shadow Program," Thorne said as they walked. "How many of you are there?" "Enough," she replied. "Distributed across critical infrastructure, military installations, government facilities. All of you operating without recognition. Recognition would defeat the purpose, Admiral. Our effectiveness depends on anonymity." They reached a junction where their paths would diverge. Thorne to the bridge for final operations, Merritt to wherever her duties took her. They paused, an unspoken acknowledgement that this conversation represented a unique moment. Neither had anticipated when the day began. "I'm sorry about this morning," Thorne said. "Had I known," Merritt interrupted gently. "You acted exactly as you should have, Admiral. Security protocols exist for a reason. You identified an unauthorized presence and responded appropriately. That's not something to apologize for. It's something to take pride in." Thorne considered this. "Still, I regret the way it was handled. This isn't the first time I've been escorted off a restricted area, Admiral, and it likely won't be the last. It's part of maintaining the cover." A junior officer approached, hesitated upon seeing them together, then continued with determined professionalism. "Excuse me, Admiral. Commander Okafor requests your presence on the bridge. The final exercise reports are ready for your review." "Thank you, Lieutenant. Tell him I'll be there shortly." The officer acknowledged the instruction and departed, casting one curious glance back at Merritt before disappearing around a corner. "Duty calls," Thorne said. Merritt nodded. "It always does. Will I see you again before you disembark?" "Unlikely. I prefer to exit as I arrived without ceremony." "Then I suppose this is goodbye, Director Aldridge." She extended her hand, a surprisingly formal gesture from someone who had spent years avoiding notice. "It's been an honor serving aboard the Aegis, Admiral." Thorne shook her hand, struck by the strange reversal of their morning encounter. "The honor has been ours, though we didn't know it." With a final nod, Merritt turned and walked away, her posture already shifting subtly back to that of an unremarkable civilian contractor. Within 10 steps, she had transformed, becoming once again the kind of person eyes would pass over without registering. Admiral Thorne watched her go, marveling at the skill involved in such a deliberate diminishment of presence. Then he turned and headed for the bridge, his thoughts already turning to the operational matters awaiting him. 2 days later, as the USS Aegis approached its home port of San Diego, Admiral Thorne realized he hadn't seen Merritt Aldridge since their conversation on the flight deck. He made discreet inquiries, learning that a civilian contractor matching her description had been processed for disembarkation during the night shift while the carrier was still 30 m offshore, departing via helicopter on what was listed as priority transport. No further explanation was provided, and Thorne knew better than to push for one. She had done exactly as she said she would, departing without ceremony or acknowledgement. It was fitting, he supposed, for someone whose entire career appeared to be built around remaining unnoticed until the critical moment. During the post-deployment briefing with his senior staff, Thorne made no mention of Merritt Aldridge or the Shadow Program. Instead, he focused on the operational successes of Operation Stillwater, the technical lessons learned, and the preparations needed for their next deployment. When Commander Afer presented the security assessment, there was a single line referencing a system authentication anomaly that had been resolved through redundancy protocols. The deliberate understatement brought a small smile to Thorne's face, unnoticed by most in the room. As the briefing concluded and his officers filed out, Thorne found himself studying each face with new awareness. Which of his crew might be the next shadow operative? Would it be someone already aboard or a new arrival during their time in port? Would he ever know for certain? The questions remained with him as he completed his final duties of the deployment, signing off on reports and preparing for his own brief shore. In quiet moments, his thoughts would return to the image of Merritt Aldridge standing on the bridge, entering her override code with calm precision while chaos swirled around her. 6 months later, during a routine security inspection, while the Aegis was docked for maintenance, Admiral Thorne noticed a new face among the technical contractors. A younger man with unremarkable features and a quiet demeanor, who seemed to blend into the background of every room he entered. The man's eyes, however, held a watchful quality that Thorne now recognized. Their paths crossed briefly as Thorne made his rounds. The contractor nodded respectfully. "Admiral." Thorne returned the nod. "Carrying on," he said simply. "Always, sir," the man replied. No further words were exchanged. None were needed. Thorne continued his inspection, allowing himself a small smile at the knowledge that the ship remained protected by guardians few would ever notice. In his quarterly report to Fleet Command, submitted the following week, Thorne included a seemingly innocuous sentence. "All operational security protocols functioning as designed." It was as close as he would ever come to acknowledging what he had learned about the invisible layers of protection surrounding his command. Life aboard the carrier returned to its normal rhythms. Operations continued. Drills were conducted. Missions were accomplished. But Admiral Thorne found himself paying more attention to the people at the periphery of any room he entered. The quiet ones, the watchers, the ones who moved through the world without leaving ripples. In the officers' mess one evening, he overheard some junior officers discussing the incident during Operation Stillwater, the story already taking on mythical qualities in its retelling. The woman who had walked onto the bridge and taken command had become, in their telling, a mysterious government agent with almost supernatural authority. Thorne didn't correct them, let them believe what they would. The truth, he had come to understand, was both simpler and more profound. The most effective guardians were those who asked for no recognition, who carried their authority silently until the moment it was needed most. And perhaps that was the most important lesson he had learned from his encounter with Merritt Aldridge. True security didn't announce itself with uniforms and rank insignia. It moved quietly through the world, watching, waiting, protecting without being seen until the moment when someone needed to step forward and input the code that only they possessed. Subscribe to my channel, The Ordinary Heroes.